It was past midnight, and every student was supposed to be asleep. But tonight, something strange was happening. Janet was wide awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She had been feeling uneasy for days, like someone, or something, was watching her. She glanced at the other beds in her dormitory. All the girls were fast asleep, but Janet's gut told her something wasn't right. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside the window. Her heart raced as she sat up in bed. Was it the wind? Or an animal? Carefully, she tiptoed to the window and peeked through the curtains. What she saw made her blood freeze. Stephanie was outside, standing in the middle of the courtyard, staring up at the dormitory building. Her thick frame looked larger than usual under the dim moonlight, but something was off. Her head was tilted to the side, her eyes glowed faintly red, and she wasn't moving. "What is she doing out there?" Janet whispered to herself. Stephanie slowly turned her head, as if she had heard Janet, even though Janet hadn't made a sound. Her glowing eyes locked onto the window, and her lips twisted into a chilling smile. Janet ducked behind the curtain, her heart thudding loudly. This wasn't the first time something strange had happened since Stephanie joined the school. She was new, a transfer student who kept to herself most of the time. Many students didn't like her because of her size and her plain, unattractive face. They whispered cruel things about her, calling her names like Fat Witch or Stephanie the Ogre. But Janet had always felt there was more to Stephanie than just her appearance, something darker. For weeks now, students and teachers had been disappearing. A junior student named Ada hadn't shown up for morning assembly, and the teachers assumed she had overslept. But when they went to her dormitory room, it was empty. Her bed was neatly made, her books stacked on the desk, but Ada was nowhere to be found. The second disappearance happened 2 days later. This time, it was Mr. Okoro, the school's PE teacher. He had been known for his strictness, often patrolling the school grounds at night to ensure no students sneaked out of the dormitories. But one morning, he simply didn't show up for breakfast. His wife, who worked in the school kitchen, raised the alarm. "He never came back to the staff quarters last night," she cried. A search was conducted, but there was no trace of him. By the time the third student went missing, everyone at St. Mary's boarding school was on edge. Parents demanded answers, but the school administration had none. The principal, Mrs. Agbahe, assured everyone that the authorities were investigating, but behind closed doors, she was just as frightened as the rest. "It doesn't make sense," she confided to the vice principal. "There are no signs of a break-in, no screams, no witnesses. It's as if they're vanishing into thin air." The students were terrified to leave their dormitory at night. Whispers of a ghost or a monster haunting the school circulated among them, but no one could prove anything except Janet. She had a strong feeling Stephanie was connected to all of it. Stephanie acted innocent during the day, pretending to be shy and harmless, but Janet had seen her lurking around at odd hours. She always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now, standing in the courtyard under the moonlight, Stephanie didn't look shy or harmless at all. She looked like something out of a nightmare. Later that night, Janet couldn't sleep. She stayed awake, clutching her Bible and whispering prayers. For some reason, she felt like Stephanie was coming for her. In another part of the dormitory, Stephanie stood in front of a mirror, staring at her reflection. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Slowly, the reflection in the mirror began to change. Her face twisted into a horrifying mask, her eyes glowing brighter, and her mouth filled with sharp teeth. A low, guttural voice echoed in her head. "Tonight, we kill her, the one who dares to resist us." Stephanie smiled. She knew exactly who the voice was talking about. Janet. She had tried to harm Janet before, but every time, something had stopped her. It was as if an invisible force was protecting the girl. But tonight, Stephanie was determined. The clock struck 2 a.m., and the silence in the dormitory was deafening. Janet lay in her bed, pretending to be asleep. Her heart raced as she clutched her Bible under the covers. She knew Stephanie was coming. Suddenly, the creak of a door echoed down the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps followed, growing louder with each passing second. Janet squeezed her eyes shut, praying silently. "Lord, protect me." The footsteps stopped right outside her door. The air grew colder, and a faint, unnatural whisper filled the room.
"Janet!"
the voice called, chilling and otherworldly.
Come out. Come out and face me."
Janet's breath hitched. The door creaked open, revealing Stephanie standing in the doorway. Her eyes glowed an eerie red, and her twisted smile revealed sharp, unnatural teeth.
I've waited long enough,
Stephanie said, her voice layered with a demonic echo.
You think you're special, don't you? Protected by something greater? Let's see how far that protection goes.
Before Janet could respond, Stephanie lunged into the room with terrifying speed, her clawed hands swiping at the bed. Janet rolled to the floor just in time, narrowly avoiding the attack. Janet bolted for the door, clutching her Bible tightly. She ran down the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the cold tiles. Behind her, Stephanie's laughter echoed, followed by the sound of her claws scraping against the walls. As Janet reached the staircase, Stephanie appeared at the other end of the hallway, moving impossibly fast. She grinned, her glowing eyes locking onto Janet.
You're only making this more fun,
Stephanie taunted, her voice dripping with malice. Janet turned and ran toward the back exit of the dormitory, her breath coming in short gasps. She burst through the door and into the courtyard, the cold night air biting at her skin. Stephanie followed, her footsteps unnaturally loud on the stone path.
You can't escape me, Janet. You'll end up like the others. Nothing but a memory.
Janet's mind raced as she darted toward the chapel, the only place she felt truly safe. The ancient wooden doors loomed ahead, and with every ounce of strength she had, she pushed them open and stumbled inside. Janet slammed the doors shut and slid the heavy lock into place. She collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Outside, Stephanie's laughter echoed, chilling and triumphant.
You think a locked door can stop me?
Stephanie's voice carried through the thick wood. The room grew colder, and the candles on the altar flickered before going out, plunging the chapel into darkness. Janet scrambled to her feet, clutching her Bible like a lifeline. Suddenly, the doors shook violently as Stephanie pounded against them, her claws tearing through the wood.
Janet!
Stephanie roared, her voice shaking the entire chapel.
You can't hide from me.
Janet backed away, her legs trembling. She tripped over the steps leading to the altar and fell to her knees. Desperate, she opened her Bible and began to read aloud, her voice shaking. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Stephanie's voice came again, softer but more sinister.
You really think he's listening? You're alone, Janet. No one is coming to save you.
The doors creaked open, and Stephanie stepped inside, her shadow stretching across the walls like a monstrous beast. The faint glow of her eyes illuminated the chapel as she advanced toward Janet.
This is the end,
Stephanie said, her voice low and menacing. But just as she raised her claws to strike, a blinding golden light erupted from the altar, forcing Stephanie to stagger backward. She screamed, covering her face as the light grew brighter, filling the entire chapel. Janet felt a surge of warmth and strength wash over her, as the presence of something greater filled the room. Stephanie's laugh echoed through the room like 1,000 voices layered over each other, sending chills down Janet's spine. The air grew colder, and the light from the moon outside dimmed as if the darkness was closing in. Stephanie, you don't have to do this, Janet said, her voice trembling but firm. She clutched her Bible tightly, her only weapon against the horror before her. Stephanie took a step closer, her glowing red eyes boring into Janet's.
You think that book can save you?
She sneered, her voice deep and unnatural.
I am unstoppable. No one can protect you now.
As Stephanie raised her hand, long, claw-like fingers emerged where her nails had been, and her shadow expanded across the walls, taking on the shape of a beast with horns and sharp teeth. Janet's knees buckled, but she stood her ground. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered, though her heart pounded like a drum. Just as Stephanie lunged at her, a bright, golden light filled the room, blinding both of them. Stephanie screamed, clutching her face as smoke began to rise from her skin. The room trembled as the light grew stronger, forcing Stephanie to stagger backward. A deep, commanding voice boomed through the room, shaking the very walls. Enough! Your reign of terror ends here. Stephanie fell to the ground, writhing in agony as the golden light surrounded her. Janet felt a warm, protective force wrap around her. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. A shadowy figure inside Stephanie began to separate from her body, its monstrous form fighting against the light. It screeched and howled, its voice filled with rage and despair.
She belongs to me,
the demon roared.
She belongs to no one but her creator.
The voice thundered. "You have no power here." The demon let out one final, ear-piercing scream before it was torn from Stephanie's body and dissolved into nothingness. The room fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting as the golden light faded. Stephanie lay on the floor, unconscious but breathing. Her face looked different, softer, more human. The wicked glow in her eyes was gone, replaced by a peaceful stillness. The next morning, the school was in shock. Stephanie was taken to a hospital, where she woke up with no memory of what had happened. She was no longer possessed, but she was deeply ashamed of the harm she had caused. Janet, on the other hand, became a hero. Her bravery and faith had saved the school from a terrible fate. The disappearances stopped, and life slowly returned to normal. But Janet would never forget that night, or the power of the force that had protected her. As for Stephanie, she was given a second chance. Though she struggled to fit in, Janet chose to befriend her, showing her the kindness and forgiveness she had never known. And so St. Mary's boarding school became a place of healing, where light triumphed over darkness. If you enjoyed this thrilling story and want to experience more captivating tales filled with action, suspense, and inspiration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Sharing helps us reach more people who love amazing stories just like you. Hit the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new stories drop. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more unforgettable adventures.